Hello, and good afternoon, and welcome to Intel Saffron AI Solutions for Financial Services deployed on AWS. My name is Nitin Gupta, Global Head of Amazon Web Services, Financial Services Solutions and Partners, and I will be your host and moderator for today's presentation. Today, along with me, you will be joined by Gail Shepard, who's the Vice President and General Manager of the Saffron AI Group at Intel. So, today, in addition to learning about AWS, you will learn about understanding the core benefits of using AWS, digital transformation and AWS for the financial services sector, how your organization can leverage Intel Saffron Anti-Money Laundering Advisor to rapidly identify and report suspicious activity with financial crimes investigations, how to accelerate this path to decision with a unique approach to process transparency, how to get started faster with an AI solution that is quickly positioned for both storage and compute resources on AWS. And remember, please post your questions in the chat box throughout this presentation as we will review questions at the end of today's event. So let's begin with a quick overview of what we are seeing in the digital transformation space. So as everybody knows, digital technology is rapidly transforming the financial services industry. Organizations today are seeking to compete in a continually evolving marketplace and are looking at new technologies to help them engage their customers. The financial services industry is moving to the cloud faster than ever. And when companies look at moving to the cloud, they do this for four primary reasons. They're looking to engage customers in new ways by delivering a consistent and streamlined experience across all channels to meet the needs of their customers. We saw this with MetLife and their MyDirect offering, which is MetLife's first end-to-end digital service for auto and homeowner lines. The system pulls data from multiple sources, internal and external, and processes on an average 15,000 data elements to produce rates within a matter of 15 seconds, and serves as a foundation for policy issuance and claim education. The system is managed by one of our ISV partners called Guidewire. Moving from multi-channel experience to cost savings, we see that when customers move to the AWS cloud, they, on an average, save 40 to 60% compared to what they're spending on premises. The third reason that we see when customers move to the cloud is faster time to market. We have seen our customers like FICO and IHS Markit be able to onboard new customers onto their cloud applications in a matter of weeks versus 12 to 18 months that it used to take them on-prem. And last, but a very important benefit is agility. When companies move to the cloud, they want the ability to spin up resources when they want and spin them down when they're done with using the compute that they require. This has led to every financial institution saying that it's not a question of if or when, but more a question of how and how quickly we can move to the cloud. So when we talk about financial services industry, we talk to our customers all the time, and there are four things that we hear that are top of mind for them. When we talk about customer experiences, we have a generation who expects everything instantly. They don't want to walk into a bank and wait in a queue. They want an instant, easy experience. It's all about customer obsession. Next, for financial services institutions, it's a question of how do you differentiate? How do you make sure your customers you're offering them the options, the choices that can meet their expectations, and also the expectations that keep going higher. Third, the ability to optimize operations. With legacy infrastructure and architecture, 2/3 of the IT budgets just go towards keeping the lights on. And that leaves very little room for innovation, very little room to build applications that are customer-centric. Last, there are now more risks, more threats, and more regulatory requirements. And as technology moves, it becomes increasingly difficult to maintain an understanding of all the threats that are prevalent in the ecosystem. When we talk about regulation, this is a fact of life that each one of you is grappling with today. We know that the industry has fundamentally changed post the credit crisis, and it's still changing. Boston Consulting Group estimates that the number of regulatory changes that a bank must track on a global scale has more than tripled since 2011 to an average of 200 revisions per day. In the United States, you have various regulatory bodies like the SEC, the CFTC, the Fed, the FDIC, FinCEN, FINRA, OCC. I can go on. In the United Kingdom, you have different regulatory bodies like the Bank of England, PRA, FCA, and then when you go to APAC, and you have different regulatory bodies based on every country that you cater to. You add to that where you have a very dynamic security threat landscape where 77% of the CEOs believe that security risks have actually increased in the last few years. And 2/3 of them believe that risk management capability is actually falling behind. And then you add to that the limited security and compliance resources that are available and how hard it is to retain and hire this talent. I really like this slide because I think this drives the message home. Deloitte Consulting published a report that said 97% of the firms they surveyed reported increased regulatory intervention in the last 5 years. Enforcements have gone up by 20%. And in another study, the Boston Consulting Group said that the fines that have been levied on the industry, it's a total of $321 billion since 2007, 2008. Just in 2015, the FCA levied $1.3 billion in fines. So we're talking about an environment that just makes it really hard for companies to keep up, and it's growing increasingly complex. And when you take that complexity and try and map it to the legacy infrastructure, it just becomes really hard. The infrastructure in the financial services industry has grown organically over the last 30 years and has been built largely on monolithic architectures. In retail, new digital channels and innovative apps have been added to monolithic core banking systems, which increase the complexity of infrastructure over time. In wholesale banking, we have a proliferation of new products during the golden era before the financial crisis, and a low priority of cost management that have increased complexity. And it becomes like a little Borg ship. As a consequence, 2/3 of the IT budgets go towards keeping just the lights on and maintaining this complex infrastructure. And the cost reduction programs that the banks have to run for IT and operations are only reducing costs at the fringe. So net innovation is slow, and it becomes really hard to remain customer centric. So enter cloud. This is what led to the rise of cloud computing as a utility. And in 2006, AWS in the cloud was born as a business out of Amazon. And since then, it has turned cloud computing as a utility where you can buy cloud computing as you need by the millisecond and scale up to hundreds of thousands of cores to run risk calculations. Gartner, in a report last year, said that AWS has many times the compute capacity as the next 14 competitors combined. Today, we have a global infrastructure with over 100 services ranging from on-demand storage to on-demand computing, machine learning, security management, IoT, data, and analytics. The highly available global network allows you to deploy your applications near your customers much faster and simpler than what can be achieved with a traditional model. And that has led to many, many large enterprise customers across banking, capital markets, and insurance that are transforming their organizations on AWS. This is a very small snapshot of companies that will allow us to talk about what they're doing with us, ranging from companies like Capital One and DBS in the banking space, to FINRA and NASDAQ and Broadridge in capital markets, to Aon Benfield, Pacific Life, and Guardian in the insurance space. But not only large enterprises, but we have a variety of fintechs ranging from companies in lending, wealth management, payments, to name a few areas. Forbes estimated in their study that 96% of the Forbes FinTech 50 is powered by AWS. So I would be remiss in talking about financial services and not talking about something that is dear and near to everybody's heart, which is focusing on security and compliance. When AWS started, we started the company with a very deep focus around security. And the whole security offering has matured a lot over our 11-year journey. Security is job number 0 for us. Financial institutions get a higher level of visibility, control, and auditability when they move to AWS. So much so that when Rob Alexander, the CIO of Capital One, he was on stage with us 3 years ago. He said that they've built a security model with AWS that allows them to operate more securely on AWS than their internal data centers. Goldman Sachs had a very similar message when they were on stage with us at reInvent in late November. In terms of control, AWS customers retain ownership and control of their content. They choose which location to store their data, and it doesn't move unless the customer decides to move it. AWS has achieved a number of internationally recognized certifications and accreditations, demonstrating compliance with third-party assurance frameworks, such as ISO 27017 for cloud security, ISO 27018 for cloud privacy, and we produce the SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC 3 reports to show compliance with the different standards. A little bit more about security and compliance. So to support our financial services customers, we have put a range of resources at their disposal to help them build a compliant environment on AWS. We have financial services agreements with regional terms. We have enterprise agreements with financial services addendums and regional assurances. We have AWS support, which includes enterprise support used by highly regulated customers. And then we have a team that comprises ex-regulators and team that talks to the regulators all the time to understand how the environment is changing. And we provide regulatory compliance material to support customers in their implementation of regional requirements and considerations. Question we often get from our customers is, how are financial services customers using AWS? And what kind of workloads are you seeing right now being running on AWS? When customers start on AWS, they see we see a lot of bursting and use of the risk calculations in the cloud, and that's how many customers get started. But as customers get comfortable and get gain more knowledge about running their applications in the clouds and the benefits, we start seeing more data analytics, migration of core systems from core trading applications like Calypso and Murex to core banking applications like Mambu and FIS Profile, to core insurance applications like Guidewire and EIS. And then we see that they get into this era of experimentation and innovation, where they'll start looking at improving customer experience and experimenting with AI and machine learning. To see how they can look at all the structured and unstructured data to actually start improving customer experience. I think this is the area where we're going to see a lot of innovation happen in the next decade, where companies start to use all the data that is available to them and start improving the different areas around compliance, around surveillance, around fraud detection, and around improving customer experiences. We are seeing a lot of use cases around Amazon Connect, where Connect is being used to improve the call center and the customer servicing experience that banks have today. But I think this is definitely a space to watch as we go and look at all the data that is available and then put that on the Amazon compute environment. So With that, I would like to introduce Gail Shepard, who's the Vice President and General Manager of Intel Saffron, who will take us through the next section of the presentation. Gail, over to you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Nitin. It's great to be here today. I'll make sure that I have control of this slide presentation here. So good afternoon, good morning. I am Gail Shepard. I am leading a group within Intel that is focused on reasoning and decisioning systems enabled by native AI technology. And before our acquisition by Intel in 2015, I was the CEO of this company. I've been working in decision sciences and reasoning systems since 2005, and decision science actually much before that. So what I'm going to try to do today, and gentlemen, let's go to the next slide, is talk and walk you through Intel and where we are in our investments in artificial intelligence, explain Saffron's AI approach and how that fits not only into the Intel portfolio, but into AI in general. We'll talk a little bit about Saffron on AWS and our initial deployment that we're launching in combination with Nitin and his team. And then I have a few use cases I'd like to walk you through that will explain even further the customer benefit derived from using Saffron, and in some cases already with AWS. So let's get going. So let's go to basically who is Saffron, what do we do, why were we founded? Our company has been in business since 1999, actually, founded by two former IBM artificial intelligence scientists. And originally and today, our mission and vision have really been consistent, which is to really have computer systems serve human beings and not the other way around. And so every day we adapt to systems. Every day we learn how they work. And our goal, our mission is to make sure that technology, and in this case, we're a software product, that our software is adapting and learning from the people who use it, as opposed to the other way around. So to do so, we build and deliver collaborative decision systems that are human aware, that specifically learned from and are designed for the decisions and characteristics of the people whom they are serving and interacting with, whether that be occasionally or frequently, and to provide full transparency and explanation for these decisions. So Saffron's AI is a white box, as you say, and we can provide full explanation as to why we think something's connected, why we think something will happen next, why two things or three things are similar or dissimilar, and so that and this is particularly important in banking and regulatory environments where auditors need to understand how you arrived at a conclusion, and we can provide that transparency and explanation to not only our customers, but to their regulators and others who need to know. So the whole goal, of course, being to extend our ability as humans to use all the experience that we have, and much of the experience that we have is reflected in the data, the outcomes in the data, the decisions in the data, and from that we can learn not only what happened, but also anticipate what will happen next, making better, wiser decisions overall. So let me put this in context now of what we do in some highlights. And what I'll do is I'm going to walk you through what Saffron specifically does as a reasoning system, and I'll put that in context of a few things as we go and go a little deeper with each slide. So first of all, we're building collaborative decision systems, yes. Basically, to do this, we start with a technology, a capability that learns similarities and connection patterns about people, places, and things in data. So think of us, if you were thinking about the 5 tribes, we would be an analogist at our core. Reasoning by similarity, which is the way we as human beings reason all day long. Have I seen that before? If so, what did I do about it? What should I do next? Kind of reasoning. We unify data sources, so all kinds of data, really not have no bias, whether it's structured or unstructured or semi-structured. And we do that unification at an entity level. So it might be a Chinook helicopter, it might be a human being, it might be a heart we're studying. It could be parts, it could be SARS, suspicious activity reports. Whatever the entity is something that we're going to learn about. We're going to learn about how it's connected to other things, how frequently it's connected to them, and the closeness of those connections, or distance measurements are also included. We also know the context of those connections. So basically, it is a graph-like technology that allows us to have very rich granularity at the entity level on how things are connected, why they're connected, how frequently they're connected, and potentially anticipate who else would be part of that fabric of connections for that individual thing. We basically provide business insights with Saffron by identifying who, what is related to whom and what, and returning entity ranking based on connective frequencies and context. We have network analysis that we can do, how entities are connected, and returning these connections, explanation of the network, the distance of the network, the frequency of the connections within the network as a visualization. Analogies and novelty are natural to what we do. So analogy being we've seen this before, but not in this situation. A novelty being we've never seen this before. This is a new pattern, an emergent pattern. This is particularly important in financial crimes, where we're focusing here, and in other industries where there's a very dynamic and ever-changing world. And so novelty and anomaly are constants that we have to measure and be aware of and be alerted to. Classifications were natural classifiers, so of course we do that. And then varying trends are available by the sheer granularity of the information we have. We can see emergence and or convergence or associative temporal trends. And that the nature of time is really important. We as humans are very time sensitive. And of course, within Saffron, everything that we do is we're capturing the temporal element of it so that we can see how things change over time. And that also becomes particularly important when we have account takeover activity and other types of fraud, which can take and happen over longer periods of time, or not instantaneous, like perhaps a credit card fraud. So this is an interesting and important characteristic. The world of AI is evolving. I'm going to talk a little bit about complementary learning here in a moment. But basically, the three types of machine learning or learning that we see in the market today started with classic machine learning, statistical-based machine learning. Banks and financial institutions have been using this form of machine learning since the 80s at the very least. Deep learning, although also around since the 80s, has obviously taken on great speed and depth and usage. And we are not a deep learner ourselves, but clearly Intel has invested in our Nirvana platform and therefore has a robust deep learning platform. We'll talk a little bit about deep learning and its association with Saffron in a moment. And cognitive reasoning is the ability to really take in information, outcomes, learning from all of the learners, regardless of the type, and to use that information in decision making. So whether we're learning about associations from raw data, or we're learning about who's in a visual image from a deep learning tool, or we're having some classifiers from statistical machine learning automatically tagging or classifying something, all of this information is important to us as humans in our work, and therefore Saffron uses all of that information to be able to reason from it and to make the best predictions or prescriptions about what will happen next, or prescriptions about what we should do about it. Data stores can be singular or numerous. It doesn't really matter in the world of AI, and certainly for Saffron, the more data, the better. But we also work with hypersparse data as well, so it really doesn't matter that there are 1,000 incidents of something in a Saffron example of reasoning. We are one-shot learners, so when we see something for the very first time, we may know that it's the first time we're seeing it, but we can also use that information if needed in a pattern completion activity or in forecasting something that would help inform us as to the activity in play. With that, let me give you some context of, back up, about how Saffron fits into the Intel AI portfolio. So at Intel, our mission is, if it's smart and connected, it is best with Intel. And Intel is committed to AI, and you've seen, I hope, the various investments that we've been making in this technology over the last few years. We have a terrific portfolio of machine and deep learning with Intel Nirvana. We have programmable solutions through our acquisition of Altera. Movidius is really a visual cognition science that is embedded and used for computer vision, real sense and depth sensing, and then a variety of tools and standards and optimization of open source technology for the Intel platform. We are, at Saffron, we were acquired by Intel as the leader in cognitive reasoning systems. That was in 2015. Our platform leverages associative and machine learning, as I mentioned, and we do that for memory-based reasoning and transparent analysis of multi-source sparse dynamic data. And multi-source sparse dynamic data are words that we use a lot because it helps differentiate us from the more classic machine learning, where many examples are required, training is required, and it may not be natural to merge at an entity level information coming from a variety of sources of structured and unstructured data. We are also particularly well suited to small devices and making intelligent local analytics possible. So edge intelligence is part of our portfolio. And finally, we are considered a third wave AI technology, the third wave being moving from the learners of deep learning and machine learning, the statistically based learners, to reasoning systems, those that are adaptive, that learn in real time, that are more and heavily dependent upon unsupervised learning. So that positions Intel well for the future of AI, a robust contribution today, as well as well positioned for the future. We'll talk a little bit about now how we fit into global stable patterns as identified by machine learning, excuse me, and our cognitive approach for dynamic environments. So we find it helpful to pause here and just understand this if you're trying to understand what Saffron is, what it does, how it's different. One way to do that is comparing the two ways we learn and must learn in the world. So we think of AI as very complementary. We think that intelligence, whether it's natural or it's artificial, is defined by more than one approach, just like we are. In regard to learning, there are two major forms that work together today. And we see growing interest in complementary learning systems, casting more traditional statistical learning as appropriate to the slow learning of patterns that are global. And this assumes homogeneity for the law of large numbers. And stable assumes a stationary environment following train, test, and deploy. So those two assumptions are important in these characterizations. The complement to that is what we think of as the Intel Saffron cognitive approach, which is fast and one-shot learning by association, by episodic memories. And this is more appropriate for individual and dynamic patterns. And so both forms of learning are required. We need, for example, in the autonomous vehicle, we need to know what a stop sign looks like in the United States. And every time we see one, recognize it and then have rules around what to do about it, right? That would be a global stable pattern. But in anti-money laundering, where fraudsters or money launderers are changing their practices all the time and frequently and outpacing the rules and models designed to identify them, we need a more dynamic, real-time environment of learning and identifying these changes and patterns and knowing what to do with them. So we need more than just perception, but memory and reasoning is the point. And so working together, we can build a more complete learning system. And this is what Intel has assembled with Nirvana and with Saffron, as we mentioned here. Going forward, let me talk a little bit about some of the things that we're doing in more detail and just at the core of our technology before we move into our use cases. As I said, we connect memories by association, and this is, some of you may think of this as graph connections, and we identify statistical dependencies between people, places, things, and situations, events, episodes, actions, outcomes. Whatever is represented in the data is observed. And the power of this approach rests in a single universal query of a memory base that can be composed into a large number of fundamental functions, as identified here. So associations is the most elemental query that we use, and it returns things that are linked together. The query engine computes Kolmogorov complexity as a distance metric. And beyond correlation, the distance is a measure of generalized dependency between two things. We also look at associations over time. So we have the trends algorithm, and this also computes or uses the distance measurement over time. Similarities is probably as one of my customers described it, as the money machine. Similarities is core to memory-based reasoning. It's computed by looking up the associations of one thing and then finding others with the same associations. It's model-free. It's rule-free. It's really at query time, a signature that's created about a thing that you want to understand what else looks like it or is dissimilar from it. And so similarities is defined as a lookup of a nearby neighborhood. And given this neighborhood, we can predict and score classifications from there. So that is a continuous flow of thinking and what we call a thought process that we use in our analysis. And then finally, we can also compute anomalies from similarities. And anomaly detection for financial crimes involves the finding of such peer groups, for example. And also novelty, which is what's missing. So when we understand patterns, we can also see what's missing in a pattern and identify what could be the thing that's missing in that pattern. So these are some of the core functions of Saffron. And if we take a look at the platform itself, what we see is a full AI system, starting with the information sources and ending with a decision process. First, we collect data, unstructured and structured data from various data silos. We tag that. We use a variety of natural language processors and an entity bus, if you will, extraction bus to understand what's in data. We then can, of course, store it in what we consider a knowledge base or a memory base. And this is the hypersparse graph representation of what's in the data. So we're not restoring the data itself, but the connections that we find in the data. Then we use the algorithms you just saw to inform and explain what we're finding in the data. So in addition to having this rule-free, model-free approach, we have full explanation of what we found. And when I say rule-free and model-free, frankly, there is a model of the world that we're creating from the data as we extract information from this data, the people, places, and things in it. And that in fact becomes a representation of what we know about, what we've learned about so far. And that representation is frequently and constantly updated incrementally, one action, one activity, one piece of information at a time. So it's always current and updated based on the information available. And then finally, we have visualization tools ourselves, such as Saffron Advantage, or can connect with our customers' visualization or third-party products. All of this sits on top of AWS in a virtualized hardware environment, and it uses Intel Xeon scalable processors and other technologies that we have combined with AWS to deliver to the customer in a seamless way. Now, shifting gears on you here, the industries that we serve are vast and important, finance being the topic of today, but we also are serving the defense industry, and in fact, in our early life at Saffron, this is an industry that we spent a significant amount of time with in the intelligence community and working with the warfighter. Industrial, complex manufacturers, aerospace. One of our key customers has been in the aerospace industry since 2000, or with us since 2005. Further into energy and health. The examples that I'm going to talk about today are in financial services, and as Nitin said so eloquently, there are significant challenges in this industry. What we will focus on, and just to sort of extract from Nitin and center us on where some of the solutions that Saffron's building are focused and delivered on today, is that basically, we know that since 2007, there's been massive transformation underway in financial services. Nitin did a terrific job explaining what some of those are. To simplify that for our illustrations, frankly, changing more sophisticated customers, right? And the threat of fintech and the emergence of new competitors with no legacy debt in terms of IT and other items. And the regulatory framework that Nitin talked about which is constantly changing, 200 changes potentially a day, with more change underway. And could be simplification, could be further complication. But constant change is one of the characteristics that we see in the financial services industry today. And legacy applications, legacy products that were designed for potentially more stable worlds are now atrophying in terms of their value that's being delivered to the financial services industry, and specifically banking and insurance. So the challenge of leveraging massive volumes of data, one of my customers is really focused on the movement of data, and how can we prevent constantly having to move data around there because of the number of legacy systems it resides in, and the cost of movement. Unifying that intelligence from all of that data has been near impossible until Saffron. So structured transactional data, semi-unstructured data that we talked about, internal and external sources coming together is an important accomplishment that we have achieved in some aspects, but also a big challenge for the banks and the insurance companies. Access and analyzing data stored in multiple systems of record, of course. With that, keeping pace with the constantly evolving criminal element, and therefore adaptive AML and fraud systems required to break free from ultimately model design and updating. So we also believe that to democratize AI will ultimately have to free us of total dependency on data science and move data science into the application. So let's talk a little bit about how we're doing that. First of all, as noted, we do have Intel Saffron AML Advisor launched and announced late last year. We're in the early adoption stage of that product, expecting to go to what is considered more general availability in the summer of 2018. And it does what you would expect, unifying data from various sources, providing the transparency required for these regulators, and providing some advantage for those who choose to work with us as an early adopter. One of the first use cases that we have completed is customer risk assessment policy, and this is a really important area that is somewhat complex for our customers, given that there are, again, many sources of data where this information resides. And the whole idea here is for us to help our customers reduce the number of false positives and really focus down on those customers who are truly high risk. So that's the outcome that we're looking for. Reducing investigative time by the analyst, providing explainability also is helpful, not only to reducing that time, but to the regulators. These are benefits or outcomes that we have from this particular application. Basically, what we're doing is stratifying risk scores to enable risk ranking for criminal patterns, and doing that with a higher degree of accuracy. And we can go into any of these things with more detail as we have time. A second use case that we have implemented is reducing auto claims fraud with one of our insurance customers. And in this particular example, again, you'll see a pattern here. We are unifying multi-source data. We're learning first-time patterns. We're seeing anomaly and novelty in the data sources, so that we can detect rings of fraud connections, if you will, between people, places, and things that were not discernible before by either the current technology or even by the human analyst. So reducing the auto insurance fraud-based claims is a significant financial benefit to an insurance company. In this particular case, we are working on medical fraud claims, and the company was avoiding paying out only about 33% or 0.33% of them. And we were able to take that up for them really dramatically. The next use case is around our focus on serving the customer. So we know that know your customer is an important aspect of banking and regulatory compliance. We also know that through know your customer activities, our customers, our friends in the banking industry, are somewhat frustrated by their inability to expand that further into truly having a much more global picture of their customer across the bank. And so rather than just focus know your customer efforts on customer acquisition, let's also focus it on serving the customer, retaining the customer, and potentially upselling the customer as appropriate. So in this particular case, we are building techniques with our customers to reduce churn, increase the cross-sell of products, personalize the engagement to a segment of one. So because we are an entity-oriented technology, because we learn at the individual entity level, we can learn at the individual customer level and their preferences, their activities with us, their cross banking or cross insurance portfolio, in order to fully have a complete picture of the customer. And then, of course, when we make a recommendation, when we make an observation about a particular customer, we have the data underneath that to explain why. And the last use case I have for you is one of our customers is a top 10 insurance company here in the United States. Their challenge was to increase revenue per member and reduce churn with better product recommendations. This particular customer is really about serving their customers, and they wanted the ability not only to make the next best product recommendation, but to take the next best action, which could be no action, right? Or to say attaboy to their customer in some cases as the next best action. So what we did for them in our initial POC was to look at look at their schematic. They have 5 product levels, 1,353 products, and 12 million members. And our initial POC, we took a subset of that, working with about 400,000 plus or minus of those 12 million members, and all products and the 5 product levels and the 1,300 plus products. The results that we got, so we ingested this data. Most of this data was structured data. We were able to get a 50% improvement from previous machine learning recommendations and 76% accuracy that was validated that customers accepted Saffron product recommendations. We did this benchmarking with the customer actually did the benchmarking against the outcomes from prior years. So this is fact-based analysis, of course, by the customer. But the idea being that a 76% improvement, a 76% accuracy over what was previously in the 30% category was a significant aid. Now, as we move forward, the goal here is to build personalized recommendation systems, segment of one, for the financial services industry that allows us to work with wealth management and also financial wellness, helping people, regardless of where they are in the financial spectrum, do the very best they can to optimize their financial resources and apply them to the best programs. So with that, why Saffron? How are we different? How do we help? I hope that some of this has been helpful to you in understanding that. But if you think about it, the number one thing that our customers always stress for us that we should stress more to them and their counterparts is that we provide transparency and ability to explain results. We work well with fast changing high variety data. We use all the data that you have available, so unifying and federating multiple data sources, as well as those outcomes from other learners, other statistical machine learners. And that we are, although we learn rapidly, we have one-shot learning, we're not constrained by training models. We also learn from models, and we also learn from rules. And so all of that knowledge and information that is available is usable in a reasoning system like Saffron today. And so with that, let me turn the call back over to Nitin and allow for some Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gail. That is absolutely fantastic. We from AWS are super excited about the partnership with Intel and Intel Saffron and Gail and you and your team. And I love the use cases on how Intel Saffron running on AWS can better understand the customer, looking at all the data that is coming in, and help and improve decision making for the financial services institutions, whether it is to improve risk management or improving product recommendation or reducing churn. Especially love the 50% improvement that you talked about from previous machine learning recommendations. That was fantastic. Thank you for walking us through that.
Welcome. Thank you.
We are so excited about the partnership here that actually we have something here for the entire audience in order to get started with Intel Saffron and AWS. So Intel and AWS have come together to offer a total of $100,000 for every customer who wants to get started with Intel Saffron and AWS. This will be a combination of credits for AWS infrastructure and fees from Intel, and we'll offer this for the up to 5 customers who want to do this. So I think this is super exciting. So with that, I'm going to turn it to the questions, and we have a few questions here coming up in the panel, but I'm going to start reading them. So the first question I have here is, can Saffron be used with other AI approaches like deep learning? Gail, I think this is a question for you. So if you want to go ahead and answer that.
Absolutely. Okay, great question. Thank you. So as we were discussing, complementary learning is foundationally what we subscribe to, and when we build products, and deep learning is absolutely required in many of the functions that we're going to do in fraud analysis, money laundering analysis, and know your customer. A simple example that you can imagine is think about 2 people sitting in a Starbucks having a meeting, and one of them is being investigated. It's possible with deep learning and visual cognition, we can see who those people are, and we can identify who they are. It's possible that that through deep learning, we wouldn't know how they're connected. We wouldn't know how frequently they meet at Starbucks. We wouldn't know that if it's a brother, a sister, or potentially another criminal actor on the scene with this other person at Starbucks. It is Saffron that provides the reasoning behind that to help explain why these 2 people might be together on a Tuesday morning at 11 a.m. At a Starbucks located in Palo Alto. And therefore, it's the power of the combination of these 2 things that completes the thinking process to aid the decision about what to do about that. So that's a simple example of how deep learning and associative learning and a reasoning system come together. But we absolutely subscribe to the fact that there's not just one kind of learner, that there are multiple learners, just as we have different ways of learning ourselves as humans, and that the power of AI is when we bring these together in a systematic approach. The power of Intel and AWS is that we're bringing these together in a systematic approach and productizing them as fast as we can so we can enable adoption and improve decisions and improve the accuracy of those decisions and reduce the amount of time spent and false activity, false alarms, if you will.
Great. Thank you, Gail. The next question that I see here in the panel is, how did the product name of Saffron come about? Any insights and background on that, Gail? Means how the product.
Okay. Yes. So I'll tell you the true story, not the marketing story. True story is our 2 founders, Manny and Jim. We're having lunch one day, and they were talking about what to name the company, and there were a lot of recommendations. And at this time, it's late 1999, early 2000. And they started talking about food and some of their favorite things. And one of the things that came up is that in the food that they both like, saffron was a common ingredient. And they love the word saffron, and they love the implication of saffron. Saffron is a very small but powerful spice. You don't need a lot of it to make a significant improvement in your dish. And that was the basis for choosing the name saffron, and to a large degree that metaphor has continued on, because saffron itself is clearly a core part of a systematic way of making better decisions. But it's not the only ingredient, but it's a very important and powerful ingredient.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you for that was pretty interesting. So thank you for sharing that with us.
You're welcome.
The next question I see here in the panel is talking about PII, which is personally identifiable information, and what options do customers have to store requirements around PII and the payment card industry standards. So it's a combination to actually Gail to both of us. So it's kind of talking about. But why don't I start addressing it from an AWS standpoint, and then maybe if you want to add to that. So I touched upon it a little bit during my session discussion, but security is job number zero for AWS. We not only deploy thousands of people globally to make sure that everything within AWS is secure, but there is a very high degree of automation that allows you a much higher degree of visibility, control, and also auditability, not just by your internal people, but also by the regulators to actually now see where the data is. You don't have any hidden things in the closet anymore, which used to be the bane, earlier. When companies look at moving to AWS, there are very easy mechanisms to encrypt all the data, whether it is data in rest, data in transit. You set up access control. You look at configuration management. You have lots of tools, from key management systems to CloudTrail, to look at who all have touched the data, how you're encrypting the data, how you're decrypting the data. You can bring in your own keys to actually decrypt the data. So lots and lots of things that are there from an AWS perspective. But then when we start working with partners like Saffron, we talk about a model which we call about a shared responsibility model. So everything at AWS is, we adhere to PCI level 1 DSS standards. But then, we work closely with the Intel team and the Saffron team to make sure that from an application perspective, they are also looking at our best practices to pass on the data within the public cloud and then movement of data. So, Gail, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. We have a ton of questions coming in, but
no, Nitin, very, very good. Thank you. I would just add that first of all, we work closely with our partners as AWS and our customers. And because we are the recipient of data and we're using data to and organizing it to inform decision making, generally all of the data management practices, the PII practices, have been managed prior to our actually receiving that data. We also, with our customers, as we are doing with you, agree to those data standards that are required from the regulators, so that we can make sure that we're compliant with them as well. So we look at each of our industries can be different in terms of regulatory requirements, but the products that we have recognize those as appropriate and act accordingly. But again, most of the heavy lifting has been done prior to our arrival by your technology and other customer applications.
Great, thank you. Another question is, do the models in Saffron need training data, or does it self-train? In a use case where custom training data is required for a specific user conversation, how does Saffron handle it?
Saffron does not require training data. Saffron is aided in some use cases by training data. So in the case of there's a medical case where we actually use training data to learn about different heart diseases. And then we tested ourselves without the training data to see if we could, in fact, identify those patterns. So we are again, not dependent upon it, but we need a certain amount of data to be visible for having high accuracy or results in our confidence factor. So let's take the example of in one case we did I don't have a great banking example on the top of my head, so I apologize, but in one example we were doing sports performance and we were analyzing athlete injury. And we were able to, whether we had a month's worth of data or we had 9 months worth of data, it didn't matter. The accuracy of those outcomes, the predictive accuracy was retained. So a small amount of data available to us yielded the same outcomes in this case, predictive outcomes, as a much larger set of data, if that helps.
Fantastic. Thank you. There is I'm just reading through this. You touched upon this a little bit. Actually, you touched upon this, but I think there is a clarifying question here about the Saffron stack, whether it's closed or open, and how does it interact with other tech stacks like TensorFlow. So if you wanna touch upon that, Gail.
Yeah, so I would see TensorFlow as a source, our engine is a proprietary engine, so the engine itself is not open source. We do use a lot of open source technology for some of the services that surround the engine. But if you think about at the API layer and engine below, we would be a closed technology. Our APIs are available and are usable for connections to other systems by developers, and therefore we appear open at the top of the stack and the bottom of the stack. So the NLP process, the process of getting data in, all of those aspects of creating a system can be customized by the customer, the engineer, the developer. The visualization can be customized, right? So only the engine itself is proprietary. We look at other systems. Generally, we're either going to be promoting or publishing out to them in some cases, or we're going to be bringing data in from them. And so our collaboration, if you will, with other technologies will be usually from those 2 points of view.
Great. I think we have more questions, but we are out of time here. So I wanted to thank everybody for taking out a precious time and attending today's webinar. Please, reach out to us if you have any further questions or would like to avail of the combined Intel AWS offer to get started with the Saffron AI solution on AWS. And we look forward to supporting you in your current and future projects. And with that, thank you and have a great day. Thank you, Gail.
Thank you, Nitin. Thank you, everyone.